All right, let's talk about something you hear all the time in the climate debate: carbon credits. Are they this amazing tool that's going to help us save the planet? Or are they just a clever loophole for big companies to look good without actually changing? It's a huge question, so let's get right into it. When you strip everything else away, it all comes down to this one single question: can you really just pay to pollute? That's the core idea, the central conflict of this whole system. And depending on who you ask, the answer is either a definite yes or a hard no. So, what even is a carbon credit? Okay, the easiest way to get your head around it is to think of it like a permit, or maybe even a pollution allowance. One single credit gives the owner permission to emit exactly 1 ton of carbon dioxide. And here's the kicker: because it's a permit, you can buy it, you can sell it, it's a commodity traded on a market. Now, this whole idea is not new. It actually goes way back to 1997 with the Kyoto Protocol, which set up the first mandatory markets. Then in 2015, the Paris Agreement gave the system a huge boost. But what's really fascinating is what's happened just in the last few years. We've seen an absolute explosion in voluntary markets. This is where companies are buying credits not because the law says they have to, but to meet their own green goals. Okay, so that's the big global picture. But how does this all work in the real world? Well, let's zoom in on a country that is absolutely critical to the future of our climate: India. We're going to look at how India is building its very own carbon market right now. So India's strategy wasn't just created overnight. It's been built up piece by piece through a bunch of different programs. You had the PAT scheme, which was all about energy efficiency. Then you had renewable energy certificates, or RECs, to boost green energy. But the real game changer was the Energy Conservation Act in 2022. That's what gave the government the power to create the main event, the Carbon Credit Trading Scheme, or CCTS. This is the big one that ties it all together. Okay, so how does this CCTS actually work? It's pretty straightforward, really. It's a cap-and-trade system. First, the government sets an emissions limit, a cap, for different industries. Now, if a company does really well and emits less than its target, it gets rewarded with carbon credit certificates. But if another company goes over its limit, it has to go out and buy those extra certificates to stay compliant. And the whole thing is watched over by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency to make sure it's all legit. Now, anytime you build something this big, this ambitious, you're going to have massive opportunities, but also some serious challenges. It's a double-edged sword. So let's break down the good, the bad, and the tricky parts of India's new market. First off, just look at the money involved. It's staggering. We're talking about projections that the global mandatory market could be worth nearly $2 trillion by 2030. This isn't just about the environment anymore. This is a massive economic force. If India gets this right, it's not just about hitting climate goals. It's about unlocking incredible financial value. And this really highlights the balancing act India is trying to pull off. On the one hand, the potential is huge. A good system could be the key to meeting those Paris Agreement goals, like cutting emissions by 45% by 2030. It can also help Indian companies stay competitive as other places, like the EU, bring in carbon taxes. But then you look at the other side of the ledger. The challenges are real. Some of the biggest polluters, like steel and thermal power, aren't even part of the scheme yet. Critics worry the targets are too easy to hit, and that the cost could be way too high for smaller businesses to handle. These specific challenges in India, they actually point to much bigger, more fundamental worries people have about carbon credits everywhere. Is the whole concept built on a shaky foundation? Are we trying to patch up the climate with a system that's just full of holes? And here's where it gets really serious. A major study in the journal Nature basically found that a lot of these carbon offset projects, well, they just don't do what they say they do. They overestimate their impact, claiming they've reduced way more carbon than they actually have. That kind of thing just completely erodes trust in the whole system. The problem really boils down to this one key idea: additionality. For a carbon credit to be real, to be legitimate, it has to pay for something that wouldn't have happened otherwise. Like, it has to fund a new solar farm that genuinely replaces a planned coal plant. The dark side of this is greenwashing. That's when a company gets credit for something that was going to happen anyway, like protecting a forest that was never actually in danger of being cut down. And this leads to maybe the most shocking statistic of all. A 2023 study dug into where the money from these projects actually goes, and it found that only 0.3%, let that sink in, less than half of 1%, actually makes it to the local and indigenous communities who are on the ground doing the work. And the problems just keep piling up. What about permanence? You can get a credit for protecting a forest, but what happens when that forest burns down in a wildfire? all that carbon goes right back into the atmosphere. Then there are huge issues with community rights. One report found that half of the forestry projects in India failed simply because of conflicts with local people. And on top of all that, the system can actually make global inequality worse because it's often much harder for developing countries to get the resources they need to create these credits in the first place. So look, it's clear the system has some deep, deep flaws. But that doesn't automatically mean we should just scrap the whole thing. The real question is, can we fix it? How do we plug the holes? So what does a better system look like? Well, experts have a pretty clear roadmap. Step one is a big mental shift. We need to stop thinking about credits as just a product to be traded and start seeing them as an environmental responsibility. From there, it's about practical things. We need radical transparency with real-time tracking and independent verification. We need platforms that give local communities a fair shot at negotiating. We need to focus only on high-quality projects that we know for a fact make a real difference. And finally, governments have to step up with stronger rules that line up with global standards. Which brings us right back to where we started. Is a carbon credit an environmental responsibility, or is it just a tradable commodity? Maybe the real answer is that for this whole thing to work, it has to be both. But that leaves us with an even bigger challenge. Can we actually build a market that's smart enough to drive change, but also wise enough not to let us fool ourselves into thinking we're saving the planet when we're not? The entire future of this idea really hangs in the balance of that question.